Well, hello again and welcome Year 9 to Lesson 6. Okay, so here's your do now task. Why would men in Verona want to marry Juliet, Lord Capulet's daughter? So let's have a think. We know that the Capulets are a very wealthy and a very powerful family in Italy. So they have a lot of money and a lot of possessions. And Lord Capulet would be highly respected and esteemed. So why would Juliet be a really good catch for any young man in Verona? And as an extension, what kind of men would Lord Capulet approve of? And who would he likely to be disapproving of for Juliet's hand in marriage? So stop and have a think. Now, the whole reason, of course, that many men would want to marry Juliet to be close to Lord Capulet, because he is both powerful and respected. And if you were his son-in-law, it would mean that you were also respected. Lord Capulet is a brave and proud man, and it is highly likely that he would want his daughter to marry someone worthy of her. And he would probably want her to marry one of the Capulet family's friends. Now, in Shakespeare's time, marriage was very much a business arrangement, as well as not always a love match. And Lord Capulet certainly would be looking at young gentlemen in Verona who have wealth and are already of high status that would obviously equal his daughter as a valuable prize as a hand in marriage. Now we know that Juliet is the daughter of the wealthy, powerful and respected Lord Capulet. Today we're going to find out about the first marriage proposal she receives. And at the time Shakespeare was writing, girls, even 12 and 13-year-olds, would be married and possibly have children. And I know that might shock you, but we are talking about a very different era. And an age and a time in which life was very hazardous because of plague and disease and childbirth. So young girls, as soon as they were ready, were often married and had children at a very early age. So after the fight between the Montagues and the Capulets has taken place, we find Lord Capulet talking to his friend Paris. So we're going to read a section from "But Now, My Lord," to "Exit with Paris." And as before, I've uploaded the appropriate lines onto the PowerPoint so that you can follow if you're following from a different version, but you can certainly follow on the PowerPoint. So let's read this section together. Paris says, "But now, my lord, what say you to my suit?" In other words, will you give me your permission to marry your daughter? And Capulet says, "But saying over what I've said before, my child is yet a stranger in the world. She hath not seen the change of 14 years. Let 2 more summers wither in their pride, ere we may think her ripe to be a bride." So Capulet is saying, my child is very innocent. She's very naive. She's a stranger to the world. She's been very sheltered, and she's not yet seen or reached her 14th year. So she's only 13 years of age. And it's his advice to Paris that 2 more years are allowed to pass, 2 more summers pass by until Juliet is ready or ripe to be married. Now Paris reminds Capulet that younger than she are happy mothers made. And of course, in the days that we've mentioned, young girls were often married at 12 or 13 and had given birth to children. But Capulet replies, "And too soon marred are those so early made. Earth has swallowed all my hopes but she's the hopeful lady of my earth. But woo her, gentle Paris, get her heart. My will to her consent is but a part. And she agreed, within her scope of choice, lies my consent and fair according voice." In other words, Capulet is very mindful that it's not always a good idea to marry too soon. And he refers to the fact that Juliet is his only child. She is the hopeful lady of my earth. All his other children have died, whether in infancy or in their early childhood. Earth has swallowed all my hopes but she. And so she is very, very special to Capulet, and he's advising gentle Paris to woo her, to court her, to get her heart. In other words, Paris has to win Juliet's heart. And he reminds Paris that my permission, my will to her consent, is but a part. So it's very important to Capulet that Paris woos Juliet, gets her heart and her agreement, and then Capulet will give his permission for Juliet to marry Paris. Capulet goes on to say, "This night I hold an old accustomed feast, whereto I've invited many a guest, such as I love. And you among the store, one more, most welcome, makes my number more. At my poor house look to behold this night earth-treading stars that make dark heaven light. Such comfort as the lusty young men feel when well-apparelled April on the heel of limping winter treads. Even such delight among fresh fennel buds shall you this night inherit at my house. Hear all see, and like her most, whose merit most shall be. Which on more view of many, mine being one, may stand in number, though in reckoning none. Come, go with me." And so Capulet says, tonight I'm going to hold a traditional feast. I do this every year, and I have invited many a guest of the people that I love, that I'm close to, my friends, my family, and you amongst the rest are most welcome. Will make my numbers increase by one. But he advises Paris to look and to hear and to like her most, whose merit most shall be. He actually reminds Paris that there are going to be lots of other beautiful young women at his feast. You can probably hear my cat scratching on the carpet. And Paris has the opportunity to see if, whilst Juliet, of course, is a beautiful young girl, Paris may prefer some of the other women that he's going to see at the party. So Capulet's being really very sensible. And then he's interrupted by a servant giving him a list, or rather he gives the servant a list and says, "Go, Sirrah, trudge about through fair Verona and find those persons out whose names are written there, and to them say, my house and welcome on their pleasure stay." So it's fair to say Capulet's in a really good mood, and he's giving the servant a list of all the people that he wants to invite to his feast. And so he seems to be very reasonable and very loving as a father. So let's take a pit stop and just see where we are. You have a series of statements and you need to decide whether they're true or false. So first of all, Paris demands to marry Juliet. True or false? Secondly, Lord Capulet thinks that Juliet will not marry Paris because her personality changed when she turned 14. Or 3, Lord Capulet says he gives his permission for Paris to marry Juliet. 4, Lord Capulet says that Paris must win Juliet's heart as well. And finally, Lord Capulet says he will take away his permission if he sees Paris dancing with anyone else at his party that night. So you may want to pause the PowerPoint for a moment while you decide which is which. So it's not true that Paris demands to marry Juliet because he is very respectfully asking Lord Capulet's permission. 2 is false. The reason Lord Capulet is reluctant to let Juliet marry is because she's only 13 years of age. Number 3 is true. He does give his permission for Paris to marry Juliet, but he also correctly says that Paris must win Juliet's heart as well. And Lord Capulet, it's false to say that he's going to take away his permission if he sees Paris dancing with anyone else. He very wisely says, come to the feast, you may well meet someone you prefer at the party. Now it's worth pointing out that Paris is friends with Prince Escalate and Lord Capulet, but he's not a member of either family. And after Lord Capulet gives Paris his permission to marry Juliet, he gives him some advice. So you'll need to go back to the 2 preceding slides. I'm sorry to say that I don't think the line numbers are going to be correct, but I have highlighted and explain the advice that Lord Capulet gives Paris. And I think it won't be too hard to find out what the advice is. And why do you think Capulet is giving him this advice? So Lord Capulet is advising Paris to win Juliet's affection, and Capulet will only give his permission if Juliet wants to marry Paris. And he also says that Paris should take the opportunity to dance with the many beautiful women at his party, as Paris may prefer them to Juliet. So what were your ideas for this question? Now, not surprisingly, word of Paris's intention to marry Juliet spreads fast. Lady Capulet, Juliet's mother, hears of the news and wants to share it with Juliet. Now, Juliet's nurse is also present, and it's important to know that the nurse would probably be a lot closer to Juliet because she would have helped care for Juliet from the very beginning and helped to raise her. And so in some ways, the nurse and Juliet would have a much closer relationship than the relationship Juliet has with her mother, which is actually quite a formal and respectful and rather distant one. So let's find out how Lady Capulet shares the news that Juliet is about to be married and how Juliet and the nurse react to this news. So again, we're going to read to the end of the scene. We're going to look at scene 3, reading from Thou Wast, and again, I've put the words on the slides for you. Now, the nurse is chattering away here, and she's saying, "You were the prettiest babe that ever I nursed, and I might live to see thee married once, I'd have my wish." So the nurse is quite voluble. She likes the sound of her own voice, and she's saying, "You know, I'd just love to see you get married, and that would be my heart's desire." Now, Lady Capulet is much more formal, possibly slightly more stilted, possibly a bit more embarrassed about the way she's introducing this. And she says, Marry is the very theme I came to talk of. Tell me, daughter Juliet, how stands your disposition to be married? How do you feel about getting married? And Juliet replies in a very formal way, "It is an honour that I dream not of." In other words, I haven't really thought about marriage in any way, shape or form, but it would be a great honour. And the nurse babbles, "An honour? Were not I your only nurse, I would say you've sucked wisdom from my teat." So she's joking there. Lady Capulet, "Well, think of marriage now. Younger than you, here in Verona, ladies of esteem are made already mothers. By my count, I was your mother much upon these years that you are now a maid. Thus then, in brief, the valiant Paris seeks you for his love." So Lady Capulet is telling Juliet that actually there are many young girls, younger than 13, girls of high status and standing in Verona who have already had children. And she says, by my reckoning, by my count, I actually gave birth to you very much at the same time, you know, at around about the age of 13 that you are now. So in brief, she's telling Juliet that the noble Paris wants to marry Juliet. And the nurse, of course, is very enthusiastic. "A man, young lady! Lady, such a man as all the world! Why, he's a man of wax!" And Lady Capulet says, "Verona's summer hath not such a flower. Nay, he's a flower in faith, a very flower. What say you? Can you love the gentleman? This night you shall behold him at our feast. Read o'er the volume of young Paris's face, and find delight written there with beauty's pen. Examine every married lineament, and see how one another lends content. And what obscured in this fair volume lies, find written in the edges of his eyes. This precious book of love, this unbound lover, to beautify him only lacks a cover. The fish lives in the sea, and 'tis much pride for fair without the fair within to hide. That book in many's eyes doth share the glory that in gold clasped locks in the golden story. So shall you share all that he doth possess, by having him, making yourself no less." So Lady Capulet is asking Juliet, can you bring yourself to love the gentleman? and you will get an opportunity tonight to look at him at the feast. And then we have an extended metaphor about Juliet being able to explore the features that Paris has, rather like an open book. And she has to make a judgment on what she can tell about Paris's character purely from the outside. He's a book of love, she says, but you really need to obviously you can't see everything without turning all the pages, but you will get an opportunity to meet him and see what you can make of him at tonight's feast. Now, the nurse here is picking up on the last thing that Lady Capulet said, and she's being a little bit crude here by implying that women grow by men. In other words, they make love and they produce a baby, and so women get larger by a pregnancy. And Lady Capulet sounds as though she's cutting the nurse off here. Speak briefly. Can you like of Paris's love? And it's interesting to see Juliet's answer is very formal and very decorous. She's being very, very respectful to her mother by saying, I'll look to like, if looking, liking move, but no more deep will I indict mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly. In other words, I will look at Paris, but I'm not going to do any more than that. I'm not going to commit myself in any way, shape or form without having your permission first. And as before, in comes a servant to say, Madam, the guests are come, supper is served, you called, my young lady asked for, the nurse cursed in the pantry, and everything in extremity. I must hence to wait. I beg you, follow straight. We follow thee. Juliet, the county stays. And the nurse says, go girl, seek happy nights to happy days. And they exit. So just as in Act 1, Scene 2, Lord Capulet gives Paris some advice, in the scene that you've just read, Lady Capulet and the nurse gives Juliet some advice as well. So again, think back, go back to the preceding slides and look at the advice that Lady Capulet gives to Juliet. And how does the nurse feel about Paris? But I think you can tell from the image below that the nurse is absolutely delighted and over the moon with the wonderful match that Juliet can make with Paris. And so here we are. Lady Capulet says Juliet should consider marrying Paris, and even though Juliet is young, Lady Capulet had given birth to her by the time she was Juliet's age, and she tells Juliet to admire him at the ball, to see how handsome he is, and the nurse is fully in agreement that Paris is a very handsome man. Now, when we looked at Bradley's essay in Lesson 5, we saw that one of the features of a tragic hero was that the tragic hero acts. They try and do things. They don't just let things happen to them. But it's true to say that this is not the case in this scene, because Juliet cannot be described as being active in any way. She's very formal, she's very respectful, and she very much replies to her mother that she will obey her parents. So you won't be able to discuss in pairs, but you need to think about how she responds to the news of Paris's proposal and perhaps go back to look at the preceding few lines. And so your final task is to write a paragraph on this question. How does Shakespeare present Juliet in Act 1, Scene 3? And again, you may want to pause the PowerPoint at this point to write your paragraph. And you, of course, will need to go back through and look at Juliet's answers. Lady Capulet does most of the talking. The nurse does quite a fair bit of babbling. And Juliet's replies are quite reserved. So here in Act 1, Scene 3, Shakespeare presents Juliet as a humble and obedient daughter. She tells her mother that marriage is an honour that she's not dreamed of. She's meek and listens patiently to what her mother says to her. At no point does Juliet say whether she wants to get married or not. She just accepts what her mother tells her. After hearing her mother's description of Paris's looks and personality, Juliet says she will look to like Paris in an attempt to please her mother. Juliet wants to like Paris to marry him. She wants to obey her mother's wishes. And at the start of Romeo and Juliet, Juliet allows other people to tell her what to do and how to feel. And finally, we have quiz time. So you'll need to look at the link to the quiz and circle the correct answers. And then, of course, you can check your answers against the following slide. But don't cheat because it's not in your favour. Do the quiz correctly and well, and be honest, and then obviously let your teacher know what marks you've scored. So well done, and we're well into this tragic story of Romeo and Juliet. And here are the quiz answers for you to check and to let your teacher know the score that you got out of 10. And note that you've got to get either 2 or 3 statements right in order to qualify for a correct question answered.